So when SIP trunking was presented to you as a solution to some of the challenges your organization was facing, what were some of the, concerns that you might have had in deploying that type of?
Yeah, certainly. We actually waited. We waited about a year from the time that it was actually introduced to us to the time that we actually signed on to it, and part of that was just to allow us some time to do the research. But of course, it's understanding how it interfaces. At the time, we hadn't made the commitment to move to call manager and a centralized phone system. So it's trying to understand how does the interfaces work, with the existing Avaya systems, if that's what we had to go with. The challenges were certainly the fact that is it just voice over IP, or is there something else added to it? The technology was new.
And Melanie, from your experience, what other fears or concerns have prevented businesses from adopting, and are they warranted?
Well, I think the biggest one is quality of service. So making sure that the voice quality is up to par. That's probably the biggest concern that we hear. We also hear, am I ready to make this move, right? I mean, you said Park it took you a year from introduction to signing, and that's not atypical. I mean, people are still trying to get used to this technology, and a lot of organizations may see that some parts of their infrastructure are end of life, reaching the end of warranty periods and things like that, and others are not. So trying to understand, let's take a look at our infrastructure and where would be a good place to start with this, and maybe we don't overhaul everything all at once. There's sometimes pushback, honestly, from IT, from staff, who say, well, if I'm cutting everything in half, where does that leave me in 6 months, 9 months, once we've done this? Right. Do I no longer have a job? And what we find is actually that what ends up happening is you can kind of repurpose your IT and MIS staff. So now they can focus on what we really consider more strategic initiatives.
And just to add to that, one of the challenges that we had to overcome in that, and we had to have Allstream explain to us, was when we pick up the phone, phones is traditional 5 nines. We pick it up, we expect dial tone. There isn't anything else. We don't expect to hear busy signals. That was one of the challenges, and obviously the architecture of the network. What do we have to do to it to ensure that the call handling is going to be appropriate? What happens if we run out of bandwidth? Right? How do we manage that? So there's a lot of investigative work that goes on, because that's something that, again, on the traditional phone lines, it's not something that you think about. You just pick it up, you make your call. If you know that if you don't have capacity, you pick it up, you dial it, you get a fast busy signal. So that was part of the challenge. Around the deployment side, again, from the design side, understanding what the entire environment looked up front was huge.
So now that you planned for it and installed the solution, were there any other things that you would do differently?
Certainly, you want to ask about the billing. One of the things that we found out with the IP trunking was when the benefit of consolidating all these trunks together and be able to have them leverage one giant pool as opposed to having individual pools. What that also ended up is it turned us into the telephone company, and we ended up having to basically break out each individual line cost. Once we got it figured out, it was easier, but there was a bit of a headache initially to figure out which the one office was getting a bill for $10,000, and the other 3 offices got bills for nothing, and they're going, "This is great, it's free." You really delivered here, and the other office is going, "What the hell have you done to me?" So that was one issue. I think everything else that we've worked with has gone pretty smoothly. You want to make sure that you do factor in some redundancy. When we did the very large office downtown, we actually used PRI for backup, and we had VIP users. So these are our account executives, and we're saying they wanted absolute 5-9 guarantees. So we said, okay, what we did was we actually programmed their numbers to go in, so that the calls would actually terminate, come in on the PRI, and go out on the PRI. If the PRI failed, and as has happened before, the calls will go out over the IP trunking network. For the rest of the knowledge workers, where it wasn't quite as critical, they're still important, but we had their calls again. They came in on the IP trunking, on the SIP trunking, and then they left on the SIP trunking. And again, if the SIP trunk failed, then they would actually go out over the PRI.
And Melanie, what other best practices are out there for businesses to follow?
So I think the most important thing from a business perspective is to talk to your end users and find out what it is that they really want to be able to do with communications going forward. We're talking a lot about voice today, and that's usually going to be what gets people thinking about this. But we've got, a whole lot of advanced communications capabilities nowadays that people are using. Even though you might not be ready today to deploy all kinds of advanced communications, you want to start thinking about that now as well. What do I want to be able to use going forward? The other thing is that, we find there is this huge move toward the consumerization of IT, right? This idea that people are bringing in their own devices, they especially on the mobile side, right? They've got smartphones and now tablets. And what we're finding is that there's a lot of pent-up demand for the kinds of capabilities that you can get with IP trunking and networks that will support that kind of thing.
Park, for your organization, what's next?
For us, it would be video. I mean, we went to the 6 class of service, so we've got much better granularity in terms of controlling the bandwidth and ensuring quality of service, which is huge.
And video can be a very big deal these days because, I don't know what you guys are planning, but we're seeing a lot more companies that are not just focused on room-based systems, which are fairly easy to manage and control. Once you start thinking about deploying video at the desktop level, that can wreak havoc on your network if you're not really prepared to handle it. So, especially if you're running video and voice traffic. And we talked a little bit about balancing and making sure that your voice traffic gets priority when it needs priority.
Yeah.
And if you start to introduce video, you need to think about, how am I going to prioritize this now, right?
Yeah. We had an MPLS network already. We had moved from frame relay to MPLS, but then we also had, of course, we had our phone network. Loosely call it a network, but basically, we had business trunks back-ending the phone system, the various ones that we had. So, we had some offices that had, PRIs, other offices that had regular business trunks. Managing those contracts, each one is separate. Was a bit of a challenge. Was certainly a bit of a challenge. On the SIP trunking side, we saw that as a foundation. We have voice over IP, so SIP trunking, commercial voice over IP, if you will. But basically, we saw that as a foundation for linking all of our various systems together, providing that one unified platform that underlies the various phone systems that we have. We started back in 2007 looking for a SIP trunking solution. And Allstream was really the only player in that market at that particular time, and that was after, we waited a year after it was introduced in 2006 before we actually started moving to it. What I would tell people that are looking into it today for a SIP trunking solution is to make sure you understand the maturity of the solution that you're looking at, where is it deployed, and certainly what the roadmap is in terms of how they see it developing, and I think that speaks a lot to the commitment that a carrier has to that particular solution.